Yeah, that's me.
Okay, Stephen Hill from C20 Future Planners.
Okay, I'm a land economist, and I'm not going to try and explain what that is. I don't really know what it is. Um, I'm also a planning and development surveyor, and my kind of interest is in how you commission places, and particularly how you make stuff happen. Um, Leo asked me to talk about neighbourhood governance and economics, which sounds like a subject which would really set the pulse racing. Um, and it's also far too big a subject to do in 15 minutes. So this is really a very personal selection of ideas and experiences, which I kind of feel more like a collection of recipes for sustainable, viable places, which is basically an excuse for some rather corny cookery metaphors. Um, our basic bits of kitchen equipment are the best places have been made with and by the people who live in them. Made, obviously, is made at different stages of the process, and we'll come back to that. And control should be exercised at the level closest to the people most effective. And this is particularly important now, as I'm sure you all know, that in the English Devolution and Community Empowerment Act that's just been passed, Section 62 says this: local authorities in England must make appropriate arrangements to secure the effective governance of any area of a specified description that falls within the authority's area, a neighbourhood area. And who is going to decide what these appropriate arrangements are? Well, you might have guessed it's going to be the Secretary of State. And you might wonder whether somebody in Whitehall is the best person to be deciding what should happen in each of these neighbourhood areas. We've been here before, so how well did we do last time? So New Labour, double devolution, early 2000s, the idea was devolve more from Whitehall to councils and then from councils to communities. And Nick Rainsford was Minister for Local Government, and he had a sounding board on local government reform. And for reasons which I never really got to understand, I was on it. And I and Richard Best, who just retired from being chief executive at JRF, with a kind of wealth of experience in neighbourhood regeneration, we were asked to articulate to the board what this second stage of devolution from councils to communities looked like. So we did our work and we did our presentation, and the response was silence, absolute silence. And then somebody said, Nick, our job is difficult enough already. For God's sake, don't make us work with communities as well. And that was kind of it. They really didn't want to do it. Local authorities had no interest in this kind of devolution to communities. So going back to our bits of equipment, we have to accept that the world is not perfect. And if we don't have all the tools we need, we just have to make the best of what we've got. How do we understand how cities work? So cooking metaphor again, here's this wonderful piece of broccoli. All the little kind of pinpricks are kind of streets clustered together in the florets, which are neighborhoods, and the narets are all kind of crammed together. There's the city, and then there's wonderful kind of leafy outer suburbs, villages around about, green belt. But when you start to kind of take that apart, what does it look like? So here's a Romanesco broccoli. And of course, when you cut it down into pieces, you see that every piece is actually the same as the next bit at the same scale up. So it's made of these kind of fractal components. They're all very self-similar. And if you've ever come across this book, Connecting the Fractal City by Nick Salangaros, it tries to help you understand how natural systems and living cities are both intrinsically fractal structures, but somehow we've been trained to think, to design places which don't have any of those characteristics. And we really ought to kind of think hard, because here's the Romanesco broccoli. It even worked out how to do urban extensions, or as we now like to call them, new towns. So what's my kind of perfect recipe for a neighborhood? Well, it's a bowl of pasta. Um, it's full of fractal components, bits of spaghetti of different lengths, bits of pancetta, bits of cheese. This is a rather neat arrangement, but you know that when you're cooking it in the pan, when you turn it onto the pan, when you start eating it, the pieces kind of slide around, but they're still the same thing. They're still that delicious bowl of pasta until you get to the last mouthful. So where do we find these recipes? So Unashamed advert, Claudia Rodian's The Food of Italy. If you haven't read this book and you're interested in Italian cookery, you haven't lived. It's a great book. And the pages in that one are very sticky and oily. But essentially, what you're trying to look at is the kind of the fundamental techniques, absolutely basic things about how we make places, the authenticity of the ingredients, how they're combined in kind of simple and complex arrangements, and crucially, they're about the traditions and the culture of the regions and the people who made them. So how do we do? Do we have in the design community and the policy community good recipes like this? Well, I've just selected one, which was called Planning Together. This was an initiative essentially of the RTPI in the latter half of the 2000s, where they basically shoehorned themselves and a team of people into the Department of Communities and Local Government, trying to help civil servants understand how the new spatial planning system could be seen as the kind of glue which brought together all the other corporate local government activities in how you make good places, and essentially demanded that we combine the placemaking and place shaping skills. Maybe we talk about that a bit more in the Q&A. I just wanted to share you this kind of diagram which we produced at the time, which is just trying to kind of represent. There in the middle, you've got what we called in those days the LDF core strategy, so your local plan, and what we don't have anymore, but had then, was a sustainable community strategy, the kind of the environmental, social, and economic dynamics of a place. And on the left, you've got the kind of the demand side, all the kind of shared inputs of local, of national, local, and community goals and objectives. And on the right hand, you've got the supply side, all the delivery mechanisms, the work of all the partners, developers putting in planning applications, Section 106 resources, all sorts of other inward investment in infrastructure and so on, and crucially, the role of public land and buildings. In between that, you've got this thing called the local area agreement. And this was something that Gordon Brown invented, not with this particular purpose in mind, but it was a way in which local government had to account very specifically over a 3-year timescale for all the revenue and capital money, public money that went into an area, trying to say, how do we use public money to best possible effect to make this area work better? This was, a rough and ready way of doing it. It looks quite complicated. It was just getting going in 2007, 2008. And of course, then we got the financial crash, planning stopped, development stopped, and then we had the coalition government and it all got swept away. The problem was that we might not have the recipe anymore, but we still had all the ingredients and we had to find other ways of putting them together. So, ottolenghi, simple. We all have signature dishes, things we like to do well. We know how to make them, and that enables us to do it without being too complicated. But also we can use our skills confidently enough so as we find some ingredient that's left over in the back of a fridge, or we see something on the market stall, we can pick it up and we can put it in, and interesting things start to happen. My signature dish would have to be this project, K1 Co-housing Project, which most of you probably know as the Marmalade Lane Co-housing Project in North Cambridge. It looks like a wonderful rural site, but it actually wasn't anything like that. As that financial crash happened, this area came to a standstill. All the developers walked off site. Most of the social housing had been already built, but they were left in the middle of an uncompleted development site. It was really going quite badly, as Jermaine Greer observed. And the site just on the corner on the left here, the original developer walked off. And Peter Studdart, who was chief planner for both the city and South Cambs district, said, well, this is a council-owned site, let's try something different. And I was given the job of scoping what else could we do with that site. And we came up with an idea of an enabled co-housing project with the council taking a lead role, very similar to the Baugruppen developments in Vauban and Tübingen that many of us had all been to see. But as you can see, it doesn't look great. And that was the product of a design code, 352 pages, a Mark I prototype of design codes, which the authors of it would never repeat again. I don't think they're in the room today, but apologies if they are. But one of the key jobs of the project facilitator, which is what we were, is that before the architect or anybody, the developer gets involved, you have to find a way of both recruiting the group, helping them learn how to make decisions collectively, but crucially trying to find some kind of unifying idea or value that brings everyone together. And that's particularly important as the membership of the group changes over time. So people joining the group need to find something to kind of latch onto. And interestingly, rather as Mikhail was describing, the one thing that everybody wanted was to live on a street where they met their neighbours. And of course, just coming to Orchard Park meant that you could see what the other thing looked like, is they didn't want to have streets like this. Nobody can live on a street like this, was their response. So, as you probably know, this is what happened. There's the street, and it's full of community life. But the important thing was that that street, or the lanes they call it, did three really rather important things. So you can see the street or the lane is up at the top of the site. It's very compact. It's narrow. I think it possibly is about 14 meters across. But what it did was it helped the spatial organization of the site. It meant that we could have much more freedom about how the rest of the site was used, including a great deal of parking space, which the local planning authority required, but which has never been used. So it's now used for all sorts of other things. It kind of adapts as life goes on. It also organized the social organization. It kind of shaped the social organization. If you want to go from your front door to the common house in the corner of the green space or to your car, you have to walk down that street. So that's where all the kind of social interaction happens. And the other thing in terms of creating additional equity in development is that we got 20% more homes on than the original design guide produced. So, but this recipe had an earlier iteration, actually 40 years previously. This is West Green Lane in South Tottenham, a very lively kind of place. And in those days, Haringey Council decided that they were going to recruit 50 existing tenancy households to be a tenant management cooperative who would be the client for a new build development over a site of about 3 streets. A key bit of the brief was that it shouldn't look like a council house. Well, you kind of sort of know what they mean. We explored this to some considerable degree, something that would be practically useful for the architect. Well, what does a council house look like or not look like? And of course, you can't really do it. So we kind of agreed to leave it and just kind of see what happened. And this is what happened. It's considering how noisy West Green Lane are. These are kind of very quiet, ordinary spaces. In many ways, strikingly similar to Orchard Park and Marmalade Lane. People were very interested in the relationship between what were the rooms that were at the front of the house, and they had various choices, and the space immediately outside in the road. And as you can see here, they invented place streets or home zones long before anybody called them that. And it still has, although it's no longer a tenant management cooperative, it still has a kind of a very kind of strong sense of place. When we asked them quite a long way down the road, why don't these look like council houses? One of the residents said, oh my God, haven't you worked that out yet? That it's not what they look like, it's the fact that we made them. And that's, in a sense, that's the key of what I would call neighbourhood governance. It's that sufficient sense of autonomy to be able to kind of shape your place, know that you can shape the place to the kind of life that you want to live there. So kind of wrapping things up, we've got done all the kind of preparation, we've had a great meal, we've used it to have time with friends, and then we have to do the washing up. And you have to do the maintenance and the repairs. And the key thing is you have to do it again tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. So in a sense, what is the nature of the activity that we're really talking about here? Ralph Erskine, I think, rather elegantly and rather grandly puts it, the exceptional urban and environmental qualities we esteem in many of our older cities were achieved with the very modest input of resources and by a careful and evolving response to the need of residents. We put it rather more prosaically in this booklet for which the RRB produced, helping people respond to the community rights and localism things that were in the 2011 Localism Act. So we just said, the challenge for designers is not to design a finite scheme based on assumptions about future behaviour, but to provide a foundation from which residents carry on designing through living in the place as an intentional community, i.e. there's never a perfect moment when all the demands of the brief are perfectly resolved in a kind of very improbable way. And I think this is an important idea because I think particularly now, you could imagine that it's perfectly possible for AI to come up with all the kind of standard layouts in which you can balance the kind of the patterns of interaction between people. But what AI can't do, I'm just about to finish, is that in a sense it can't really understand what we, as in all our kind of wonderful cussed mind is unpredictability, creativity, how we actually occupy and live in places in ways that AI could not possibly predict. Can designers do this? Well, I think they can. So in a sense, what Canny has done in the mailing scheme and on this particular site is to capture all those extraordinary kind of quirky, mad, creative people who live there. But how did they become that kind of community? And if you've ever been there, and I haven't got pictures to illustrate it, but I think if you go into the spaces between those buildings, rather as she was illustrating in Jacob Square, it's full of fractal bits. It's little bits of wall, steps, planters, few trees, all in that space where all the front doors come out and meet. And it is what I would describe in the nicest possible way, a wonderfully, gloriously messy bowl of pasta. That's what's going on there. And then one final bit, just going back to Marmalade Lane, 5 years after people moved in, town did a kind of investigated a bit of research looking at how things had turned out, what was the social value, in some cases turned into money things. And I think the thing I liked most of all was that, with that common house, the shared kitchen, the collective food buying activities, lots of young people are learning to cook with their friends, from neighbours, the placemakers of the future. Thank you.